that part. Okay, so difference quotient. Now, in in calculus, if you take calculus, and some of you will probably be doing that, you can learn more about the idea of the difference quotient. So the difference quotient measures the slope of a secant line. Slope of a secant line. That's what it is. And in this course, you don't have to know what that means. You just have to know how to use the difference quotient, how to find the difference quotient. But next semester, or the semester after that, if you take calculus or business calculus for that matter, then you're going to learn more about what this means, the slope of a secant line. But here's the difference quotient. And on your test, I will give you the difference quotient, so you don't have to memorize it. But the difference quotient's this. It's f of x plus h minus f of x. All of that is being divided by h. That's the formula for difference quotient. So given any function, and if you ask to find the difference quotient for that function, which means find the slope of the secant line, then that's the formula you're going to use. And I will give you this. So on test 2 next week, you don't have to memorize this, you just got to know how to use it. So the easiest function to use this with is a linear function. So that's what we're going to start out with, a linear function. But let me warn you, on the final exam, which is a group final, they they always have, most of the time I should say, they have a difference quotient, and it's quadratic though. And on your test 2, it will be quadratic. It won't be linear. We're going to start out with the linear one just to give you an idea, and then we'll do two more with a quadratic. All right, now, so so this is the way that most students prefer to do this. They prefer to do this in steps. And so we're going to do this in steps. The very last one, we're going to do it without looking at steps. We're going to do it a different way. And so you can choose whichever one you use, but just make sure it's either the using the steps or using the other approach to do this. If your work on the test for this is all over the place and it's not mathematically making any sense, even though you get your final answer correct, you know that I have to grade for mathematical statements. So make sure every statement you write is mathematically correct and I can follow. Don't make it too messy if I cannot follow it. All right, so here's the idea in terms of the steps. The first thing you're going to do is going to find this one right here. You see in that numerator, there are actually two things. You have f of x plus h, and then you have f of x, and then you're subtracting. So there are two things there. So you're going to find this one first. So step one is going to basically be this. You're going to say step one, find f of x plus h. Okay. Then step two is where you're going to actually, once you find this, you're going to now subtract f of x. So step two is where you can now find the numerator, which is f of x plus h minus f of x. And then step three is where you're going to take step two, which is what you just found, and divide it by h. So step three is where you're going to actually find f of x plus h minus f of x and divide it by h, and then you're going to simplify. All right, so that's the steps we're going to go through. So we're going to look at a linear function first. So number one, let's suppose we had this. F of x plus f of x equal 7 minus 3x. And the direction is going to say this. The direction is going to say find the difference quotient, for f of x. So find the difference quotient for this function. All right, so the difference quotient, remember, that means finding the slope of the secant line, of any secant line to this function. That's what you're finding. And you're going to understand that a little bit more in another course, not in this one. So in this course, all you got to do is know how to use this. Okay, so let's do step one. So step one's this. So step one, you're going to say, well, I've got to find f of x plus h first. So f of x plus h. And so remember what that means. That means wherever you see the variable x in your function and only see it one place, you're going to substitute this expression. That's what that means. So f of x plus h then becomes, so again, wherever you see the variable x, you're going to substitute this expression. So f of x plus h becomes 7 minus 3 times, in parentheses, what you're substituting. And remember, I'm substituting x plus h. All right, so that's the first major step here. Then you're going to distribute. Now be careful, some students are going to make the mistake and they're going to say 7 minus 3 is 4 and distribute a 4. But remember, the order of operations says you have to multiply first and then subtract. So you got to distribute first. So this becomes 7 minus 3x minus 3h. And then combine like terms if you can, though all these three terms are different terms. They're not like terms, so that's all I can do for step 1. So this is step 1 right here. So you did step 1. So that's step 1. So that's this part right here. All right, so step 2 now is this numerator. So you did step 1. Now you're going to subtract f of x. Now be careful when you subtract f of x. And here's why. So remember, I'm going to go ahead and write out the step 2. So f of x plus h minus f of x. So remember, we already found this. That's step 1, right? That's this right here. See, f of x plus h, that's this. So I'm going to rewrite this right here, those three terms. 7 minus 3x minus 3h. But now I've got to subtract f of x. Now remember, this is f of x right here. So I've got to subtract f of x, but I'm subtracting all of this. So since I'm subtracting all of this, you need to put this in parentheses, 7 minus 3x. And now all you do now is distribute the negative through here. And so I get 7 minus 3x minus 3h minus 7. And the opposite of a negative 3x is a positive 3x. Now here's the idea. Once you get to step 2, if you're doing this correctly, if you did step 1 correctly and you did all this part right here correctly, every term that does not have an h attached to it cancels out. Every term that does not have an h associated with it as a factor cancels out. So you see that 7? There's no h there, but its opposites here, so those cancel out. Negative 3x, positive 3x is 0. So in other words, since 7 does not have a factor of h, I better see its opposite somewhere, and I do. Since negative 3x does not have a factor of h associated with it, I better see its opposite. And notice the only thing left is the term with h as a factor. So this becomes, step 2 becomes negative 3h. So remember, step 2 is your numerator. So step 3 then is where you take f of x plus h minus f of x, which is what I just found, negative 3h, and divided by h. So remember, always divide by h. That's the formula. Divide by h. And then reduce if you can. And I can reduce here. The h's should divide out here. All right? And so you get negative 3. So the answer, so the difference quotient for f of x, which equals 7 minus 3x, is negative 3. That's the answer. All right. Now, notice the more problems you do, the easier it becomes to you in terms of the process. So that was a linear function. Now let's look at a quadratic function, because that's the one you're going to see on a test. So let's look at a quadratic function. So this will be step number 2. So number 2, problem 2. Problem 2 is this. Suppose f of x is equal to negative 5x squared minus 2x plus 5. All right, so that's the one, that's the kind that you're going to see on test 2. All right, so let's do it in steps. So remember your difference quotient, so it's going to say find the difference quotient. Find the difference quotient. All right, find the difference quotient for f of x. So this function, I want to find the difference quotient for this function. Well, here's the formula, f of x plus h minus f of x, all divided by h. And then just do it in steps. Find this first, that's step 1, then this is step 2, and this is step 3, where you divide by h. All right, so let's do it that way. So step 1 is find f of x plus h. All right, now remember what that means, just like we did here. So when we went here and we did step 1, that means, so finding f of x plus h means wherever we see the variable x, I'm going to substitute this expression, x plus h. All right, and so notice that I see an x here and an x here. All right, and so I'm going to substitute now x plus h into those two variables. And so therefore f of x plus h right here becomes negative 5 in parentheses x plus h, but remember you're squaring it. So you're going to substitute x plus h, and now you're squaring it. So in place of x, you're substituting x plus h. Minus 2 times x, you're substituting x plus h, and then plus 5. For some reason, there are always some students, a few students, that always forget about this constant. So don't forget to add your 5 to this. So negative 5x squared becomes negative 5 times x plus h. So where we saw the variable x, you substitute x plus h. So you see, so if you have to highlight these two variables to remind you to substitute x plus h in them, then do that. All right, now here's what you're going to be careful with. So this part here, simplifying this, is not as easy as we did this one. So remember when I did the linear one, getting rid of the parentheses was easy. All I needed to do was multiply by negative 3. It's not that easy here because you see you got to square the binomial first and then multiply. So let's go off to the side. I'm going to do that over here. I'm going to do another sheet of paper so that way I don't mess this little part up. So x plus h squared is what I got to find. And every time you have a quadratic function that you're trying to find the difference quotient for, you are always going to have to do what I'm about to do here. This will always show up. So remember, x plus h squared means x plus h times itself. And then using FOIL, I get x times x is x squared. The outer is xh, so plus xh. The inner is also xh. And the last, h times h, is h squared. Combining like terms, these two are like terms, I get x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. Always, you notice that whenever you do all these problems dealing with the quadratic function, you're going to have an x plus h squared, and this part will always be this right here. So now I've found x plus h squared. So x plus h squared is this trinomial, x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. So remember in previous course, because in Math 99 they learned about that a couple of weeks ago, about the perfect square trinomial. That's what this is. This right here is a perfect square trinomial. And so whenever you have a perfect square trinomial, you get a binomial squared. So in the previous course, we learned that 2 weeks ago. But that's the idea. So you get a perfect square trinomial. But you're always going to be squaring a binomial, this right here, which always equals this. So now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this right here, I'm going to substitute it here. But don't forget, it's being multiplied by negative 5, so don't forget that negative 5. So I get negative 5 times x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. So this right here, we got from here. But don't forget, you multiply by negative 5. And then now what I'm going to do is distribute the negative 2 here because that's being raised to the first power. So I get minus 2x minus 2h plus 5. All right, now distribute the negative 5 here. Distribute the negative 5 here. I get negative 5x squared. A negative 5 times a positive 2xh is a negative 10xh. A negative 5 times a positive h squared is a negative 5h squared. And then rewriting all this over. All right. Now remember what we said here, and that's important that you remember this. Now this is step 1. So when we got to step 1 right here, notice that there weren't any like terms to combine. And then you notice here there aren't any like terms to combine either. All right. So at step 1, you cannot go any further with step 1. Notice all these terms are different. None of them are alike. Now, notice how much work it took to find step 1, this right here. So finding f of x plus h is this. And that part here is f of x plus h for this function. Now step 2, remember, is this. So step 2 says, all right, once I find this, I've got to now subtract the function from it. So step 2 says I got to find f of x plus h minus f of x. All right, so that's step 2. Now, once you get step 1, the rest is easy. Once you get by step 1, the rest is easy. So notice, this is this. Okay, that's this. This and this are the same thing. So this is the work, and here's the answer for step 1 right here. So I'm going to rewrite that here. So it becomes, I'm going to start here because I'm going to need all this room. So negative 5x squared minus 10xh minus 5h squared minus 2x minus 2h plus 5. But now you got to subtract f of x. Just like in the previous problem. Remember when I subtracted f of x, I put that in parentheses? You need to put this in parentheses also. So put that in parentheses. Now remember, f of x is this right here. So that becomes negative 5x squared minus 2x plus 5. Now getting rid of the parentheses, distributing the negative, notice what's going to happen. So I get negative 5x squared minus 10xh minus 5h squared minus 2x minus 2h plus 5. And the opposite of a negative 5x squared becomes a positive 5x squared. The opposite of a negative 2x becomes a positive 2x. And the opposite of the opposite of a positive 5 becomes a negative 5. Now remember, at the end of step 2, just like over here, at the end of step 2, every term that does not have a factor of h, cancels out. And so notice, see that negative 5x squared? Here's its opposite right here. So a negative 5x squared plus 5x squared is 0. This has an h in it. This has an h in it. This does not. Negative 2x, here's its opposite. A negative 2x and a positive 2x is 0. This has an h in it. This does not. Positive 5, negative 5 is 0. So notice, every term that's left, negative 10xh minus 5h squared minus 2h, has a factor of h. And those are not like terms. It's always going to work out that way. Now at this point, here's what I would do at this point. I would go ahead and factor out the h. See, they all have an h. So go ahead and factor out an h. So this becomes h times negative 10x minus 5h minus 2. So I've factored out an h from each of those terms. So that's the end of step 2. And then finally step 3. Step 3 is where you take step 2, h times negative 10x minus 5h minus 2, and divide by, remember this right here, divide by h. And then notice these h's divide out, and what you're left with is your answer. So you get negative 10x minus 5h minus 2. And so you're going to say the answer, the difference quotient, I'm going to abbreviate, difference quotient for f of x, which equals negative 5x squared minus 2x plus 5, is this right here, negative 10x minus 5h minus 2. And there's your answer. So that's the difference quotient for this function here. Now next semester, or the semester after that, depending on which calculus you take, this is going to make more sense. Right here it makes no sense to you what this means. Makes no sense to you at all. But in college algebra, you have to learn how to use this formula, how to apply this formula, because when you do take calculus, they're going to assume you already know how to go through this process. All right, and so that's it. That's the difference quotient. Notice how long it took. So it took quite a bit of steps here. Okay? All right, so let's look at another one. Let's look at problem 3. So problem 3, in all we on the worksheets, it's either going to be quadratic or linear. All right, so problem 3. So in problem 3, let's suppose we had this. G of x equals 7x squared plus 2x minus 7. All right, and let's go through the process again. Let's do the steps. Most students prefer doing it in steps. So the direction is going to say this, though. The direction is going to say find the difference quotient. Find the difference quotient for g of x. So find the difference quotient for this function. Now notice, and this is important, when I gave you the formula, I gave you the formula in terms of f. See, f of x plus h minus f of x, because that was the name of the function. Our function here is named g. So when I give you the formula, I'm going to give it to you as this: g of x plus h minus g of x divided by h. That's still a difference quotient, just using the function name. See, this right here and this are the same thing. It's just a different name. All right, so step 1, remember, is to do this. Then this is step 2, and then dividing by h is step 3. All right, so here's step 1. So step 1, you're going to find g of x plus h. So remember what that means. That means wherever you see the variable x, in your function, you're going to substitute x plus h. So this becomes 7 times x plus h squared plus 2 times x plus h, notice the parentheses, that's important, minus 7. And then just like you did in number 2, you got to square this binomial. But you see this right here? X plus h plus h, x plus h squared. That's the same thing here. So when you did, if I can find it, when you did this right here, x plus h squared, it's always going to be this. So most students, after doing a few problems, they know by heart that x plus h squared is x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. If you don't remember that, then you're going to have to FOIL it out. So if you FOIL it out, you get this. All right, so the point's this. This right here is this. So now I'm going to rewrite this as 7 times x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. And now I'm going to go ahead and distribute the 2 here. So I get 2x plus 2h minus 7. And now distributing the 7, I get 7x squared plus, and then 7 times 2xh is 14xh. And then 7 times h squared is 7h squared. And then plus 2x plus 2h minus 7. All right. Now always make sure that you multiply correctly here. So 7x squared, 7 times 2 is 14, so you get 14xh, and then 7h squared. Some students, that when they're doing this too quickly, they'll mess up and put this as h squared, and then when they get to step 2, it doesn't work out. So make sure you're careful when you distribute in all these cases. All right, so that's step 1. Step 2. So remember, watch. Step 2 is this. Step 2 is where you're now going to subtract g of x. So step 2 is you take this. So step 2 is where you have, g of x plus h minus g of x. So we already found this part. That's this. So this right here is, I'm going to start it here, is 7x squared plus 14xh plus 7h squared plus 2x plus 2h minus 7. So that is just this. Now you got to subtract, though. You got to subtract g of x. Well, remember, g of x was this trinomial. So this is g of x. Now I got to subtract this. So I'm going to subtract in parentheses 7x squared plus 2x minus 7. And now distributing. Okay, distribute. And now I have this. 7x squared plus 14xh plus 7h squared plus 2x plus 2h minus 7, and then the opposite of each of these terms. The opposite of a 7x squared is a negative 7x squared. The opposite of a positive 2x is a negative 2x, and the opposite of a negative 7 is a positive 7. At that point, remember, is every term that does not have an h in it, its opposite better be on this side. 7x squared, negative 7x squared. That's 0. That has a factor of h. That has a factor of h. This does not. 2x, negative 2x. This is a factor of h, this is not. -7, +7. If you're doing this correctly, it's always going to work out that way. And then what you have left then is these three terms. So you have 14xh plus 7h squared plus 2h. And then what you're going to do now is see that there's a factor of h in all of these, so go ahead and factor out an h. So you get h times 14x plus 7h plus 2. So that's your step 2. Step 3 is where you now find your difference quotient. So step 3, so this is step 2 right here, divide by h. So it's this right here, 14x plus 7h plus 2 divided by h. These divide out, and that's your answer, 14x plus 7h plus 2. So the difference quotient for g of x, which equals 7x squared plus 2x minus 7, is this right here. So is 14x plus 7h plus 2. All right, we spent about a good bit of class time on this, so 26 minutes on talking about how to find the difference quotient. But there is one in your test next week, and make sure you show the work. So this is very helpful for students. Do step 1, step 2, and then step 3, and then your answer. All right, now again, you don't know what this means. You have no idea what this means. You just know how to apply this formula. In another course, that's where this will become more understandable what this is. All right, so that is the difference quotient.